Hi everyone, we're going to be getting started soon.
If you're not comfortable with it, that's fine.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming today. In the late 1960s, there grew an emerging public consciousness regarding the state of our environment. And in 1970, Earth Day was born, and our SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry immediately responded with a call to action to highlight this day on our own campus. Even those 49 years ago, ideas had originated for an entire week, encouraging the student body to reflect on our actions and how we can do better individually and as a conglomerate. Now, 49 years later, I stand here representing the Earth Week Committee of ESF's Undergraduate Student Association as the Earth Week Student Coordinator. This year, we have strived to focus our attention to the idea that the small actions we make every day are reflected in society's greater perspective of environmental issues and consciousness. We worked hard to ensure our calendar of Earth Week events aligns with this idea, including our guest speaker discussions. This year's keynote speaker is a graduate of Colgate University, holding an additional master's degree from Tufts Law School and a JD from Harvard University. She has served 21 years on the Natural Resource Defense Council, working under titles such as Chief Planning Officer, Director of Programs, and Director of Transportation and Energy. Through these various roles, she's worked diligently to develop policies that encourage advancement of efficient renewable energy systems and instillment of clean transportation policies into society. Most recently, this speaker serves as Senior Policy Advisor to Governor Cuomo. Under this role, she directs the various agencies and authorities responsible for implementing state policies needed to build an economy around sustainable, clean energy. These policies include the New York Green Bank, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, and the new Green Deal. Please join me in welcoming to the stage
Thank you so much. It's great to be here on Earth Week, a momentous time and a beautiful spring day. And it's just great to be back in central New York. I love it up here. It's so pretty. And this is just the best time to be here. Although I like coming in the winter too. You know, we don't get as much winter as we used to down in the city. So I have to keep coming north to get the winter in. So just before I get going, I just want to say a little bit about my background. As Elena said, I spent most of my career at NRDC, which is a big national environmental organization, doing policy advocacy. I mean, I had internal management and strategy jobs too, but I think a lot of people who are interested in environmental issues think about environmental advocacy organizations and nonprofit as a place to go, and they're a great place to go. Or here, like there's so much science-based work, like being the primary scientist out in the field. We were talking about marine biology and birds and all of that world of work. And I do love loons, and the idea of spending the summer on lakes in Wisconsin seems very, very appealing. But I just want to kind of give a pitch to the idea that there are so many different places that you can work and make a difference about the issues that you care about, and that work is a venue for doing exactly that, no matter what issue you care about. And you're going to spend such a huge percentage of your life working. Like, how could you not take advantage of everything that you've learned here? And you know, whether it's directly the course or just being an educated person and take it and really do something that you care about. So I'm very new to state government, so I'll probably say some things I'm not supposed to be saying, but it's amazing to be inside of state government now, having spent my whole career on the outside, but I know we have some industry leaders in the audience as well, and there's amazing jobs. I mean, I've spent my entire life working collaboratively with industry leaders in many, many sectors, because that's also where the rubber hits the road. You know, I think about the work that I did on something like, you know, energy efficiency. If energy efficiency isn't the most profitable thing for the utility to do, they're not going to do it. So that my job is to make that be the case. So just thinking about all the different kinds of issues that you care about in environments, probably, I hope, only a subset of them. There's so much opportunity out there. So whenever I'm in an academic setting, it's very exciting when people are thinking about where they're going to go in their careers, to be at that place in your life. So just want to give a plug for that broad way of thinking about it. There's lots of ways to do great work in lots of venues. So I'm going to focus on the Green New Deal, and because that's like a big thing that's happening. It's sort of, there's a zeitgeist around Green New Deal in lots of venues, obviously in Congress, locally. We just had some announcements in the city, in New York. It's been a huge framework and way of thinking about a lot of issues for the governor, and I do think we're very lucky for our governor to be so bold on these issues and to really be focused on realizing the Green New Deal and what does it mean in real life. But I'm also happy to talk about other issues. I mean, my portfolio spans all of the environmental and energy agencies in the state. So in the Q&A and discussion time, of which there will be plenty, you know, let's talk about anything that you guys are interested in. It doesn't have to be limited to the stuff that I'm talking about right now. But we're going to start with the Green New Deal in New York. And what is that? It's a commitment by the governor. And if you know this governor, you know when he makes public commitments, it's actually more reliable than legislation. Like, it will be happening. So the commitment is to decarbonize the economy. But it's more than that, because it really is a holistic approach to thinking about equity and quality of life and a just transition, and there are a lot of things sort of baked in there. So I'll get through those as we go through the talk. But the large umbrella vision is that we are going to figure out how to get from where we are now to a place where we have a carbon neutral economy and a thriving economy. And one thing that I always think about and talk about, whether it's a big set of issues like this or even in negotiating a specific policy, is that decarbonizing the economy and turbocharging the economy have got to be the same things. We cannot be talking about a world where the economy and the environment are in conflict. And there was a great environmental economist whose name always escapes me, whose quote was that the economy is a wholly owned subsidiary of the environment. And that, if we don't know that by now, we should, because there is no way that we as a species and a planet are going to succeed if we don't think about it in that frame. What does it mean to decarbonize the economy? The biggest piece and the sort of foundational piece is the electric sector. So in New York, our governor has committed that we are going to decarbonize the electric system by 2040, ahead of California. This will be a common refrain, ahead of California. So that is the boldest mandate, and there are a lot of things baked into that. Including, right now we have a renewable portfolio standard that's 50%. By 2030, and we've already committed to increase that to 70%. So the electric sector, I would say, is the sector that we understand the best, where we've been working on these things for a long time. Elena mentioned the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which is something that I worked on in the early days of my career when I was at NRDC, but was founded here in New York. And it's sort of a Maine to Maryland. Some of the states have gone in and out over the years, but it actually has had amazing stability to put a cap on carbon pollution in the power sector and have that cap go down over time. And under that program, you sell pollution permits, and then you have that flow of money that you can use to drive investment in renewable energy and energy efficiency, and it has a virtuous cycle. So there is a price on carbon, but the price is tiny. It's almost always been under $5. It's been like in the $2 range for much of the life of this program, which is 10 years now. But most people have never even heard of this program because it's not a job-killing energy tax. It's not the death of Western civilization as we know it. And yes, the coal industry executives did come to town and say both of those things would happen, and because they just couldn't imagine, and of course they had a vested financial interest in not decarbonize the electric sector in a way that could actually be good for the economy. But if you start to learn about energy efficiency and you think about how quickly costs have come down in things like solar power, that there's a policy driver behind those things that does enable us to have more jobs, lower pollution, and lower energy costs. So we've already learned all of that in the power sector, and we know how to design policies also to drive investment in renewables and energy efficiency and that's the virtuous cycle that allows to have at a lower and lower cost, even though the cap is becoming tighter over time. So what's underneath that? Solar is a huge piece and something that we've been doing for a long time. As I mentioned, the prices have come down so dramatically in the years that we've been investing in solar. It's very labor intensive. Those jobs have to be in this local because that's where the solar panels are. You can't install solar panels from China or anywhere else. That's even more true for energy efficiency. If you think about every building, the lights, the windows, the air conditioning systems, the heat, all of that work is contractors, plumbers, electricians, and they have to be in our buildings because they can't do that work remotely. So the number of jobs that it takes to improve energy efficiency in every home, office, factory, shop is tremendous. So even if you only wanted to do a jobs bill and you didn't care about climate or the environment or clean air or public health, you could still want to do all these policies just as a job creation measure. So New York has been doing a lot with our New York Sun program, and we've commitment now to double that to 6,000 megawatts. We have onshore wind also. There's some up around here that you guys have probably driven by, and we will definitely be doing more onshore wind as well. But offshore wind is an entirely new industry that is just getting off the ground. New York is committed to being the epicenter of this industry. And, you know, we got our feet wet with our involvement in Block Island, which is technically in Rhode Island, but that we were very involved in. And that's the first offshore wind project in the United States. Is very tiny. You sort of learn how to do it with that. But we are just at the precipice of launching this enormous industry. The commitment, oh no, my little thing is not, oh yeah, you can see, one of my words got off, but you can see its target. The 9 gigawatts is the important number, the important thing that's on the slide. I mean, this is by far the largest commitment. I think all other states combined adds up to 8 gigawatts, so, which is 8,000 megawatts. So that demand is pulling to this country every major offshore wind developer in the world. So they've all set up shop here. They're all hiring people here. We've got port development in the works. We've got manufacturing development in the works, the transmission and distribution system that we're going to need to absorb all of this power and deliver it to every place that needs it is, I say in the works, it's under development. We're thinking through what we need to do, the policies and investments that we need to drive to make that happen. And it's really just the beginning. I mean, we've just done the first large-scale RFP under this. There's one small project that's in the works already. And that alone is going to drive so much economic development to be the foundation for the next waves of projects that come in, and not just for New York, for the whole region that's doing offshore wind on the eastern seaboard. So this really is the creation of a whole new industry. And it's just about to get started. And even those economic development things that I've mentioned are also just the very beginning in terms of the manufacturing and the ports that are needed to deliver this amount of power, on this scale. So we'll see some things very soon. Those announcements are, I really want them to happen for Earth Week, but it's going to be very soon. So offshore wind is on its way. So one of the reasons the power sector is so important is that how we're going to decarbonize other sectors is largely about electrifying them. And if you think about the transportation sector, and you want to decarbonize the transportation sector, I mean, what does that mean? You drive to the gas station, you can get gas. Like, there's no choices. And a lot of places, there aren't that many choices other than driving. Or if there are, it's only right in the city center if there's transit, or it's just not convenient. So how do we build out a transportation system that really gives us more and better choices so that you can have a car and you can fuel it with different things, not just with gasoline, and not even with fossil fuels. So if you can have electric vehicles and you can power your electricity with renewables, then you are powering your vehicles with renewables. Let's do that. So, but also, I mean, even with transit, you do want to have electric buses, trains. You want to have also just more and better transit. So we just did congestion pricing. We need to figure out, yes, we need resources to keep our roads and bridges in fine working order, and we need more opportunity for people to do things other than drive, as they get older and can't drive or don't want to drive, or just as they want to be able to have the flexibility of not dealing with a car. It is very interesting to see the newer generations of drivers coming in saying, like, they may never buy cars because we have a shared economy now. Why would I want to have to lug that thing around? I mean, you don't have to live in the city to never want to park again and have something else, some other choices. And you think about shared biking, zip cars, when it says easy and actually easier than what you do now and more convenient, then people will just choose it as the better choice. So I think the challenge for us as policymakers is to help create the framework where companies will be able to come in and be creative and deliver people what they want because it's better, not because, we're trying to meet some environmental mandate that people may or may not agree with, and it's making them suffer, like the whole idea of sitting the older people among us. It's about having a Tesla and a Prius and having radiant floor heating. Can I just tell you, radiant floor heating is so wonderful and so efficient. Front-loaded washing machines and all of those things, it's a better quality of life. But we do want to do transit, shared mobility, reducing vehicle miles traveled, but we're all going to still need to have vehicles. So the electrification of single-use cars and buses is a huge, huge cornerstone of this, and there's no way we're going to do that without first decarbonizing the grid. Similarly, buildings, you go in your building, you turn on the heat. Hopefully there's not, a poor guy in the basement shoveling coal into the furnace, which was happening only a few years ago. New York City schools had, the janitorial staff was shoveling coal into a furnace. Like, this is not the 18th century. So we need to get out of coal in the basement. We're almost there. We need to get out of oil. We still have a lot of oil trucks and oil heat. And there had been a huge effort to convert from oil heating to natural gas, and we had a natural gas resurgence in this part of the country and very low-priced natural gas, which came with some serious concerns around fracking. A lot of concern here in New York, a lot of concern in Pennsylvania where it's happening. So we don't want all those ills. And as that was happening, cheap natural gas was coming and displacing oil in our homes, displacing coal in power plants. So there was, a benefit to that at the same time, but you want to say, okay, I realize all those things are happening and there are benefits associated with them, but we are getting off fossil fuels. So how do we map out our path from where we are now to the place of we are getting off fossil fuels and decarbonizing this economy and not have stranded investments, which are bad for everybody who is either in the business or just an investor. We don't want to have disruptions. We want to have all of our economic development happening, whether that's a big new stadium or housing. And we want to have this orderly path and be clear in our signals to the marketplace that we are going to a non-fossil fuel economy. So on the building side, that is also a lot about electrification and shifting over to electric heat pumps. You may not have been familiar with your grandfather's heat pump, but it's not your grandfather's heat pump. It's new and improved modern heat pumps that are super efficient and function well. Radiant floor heating is also part of it, but the electrification of buildings and the extraction of fossil fuels from our buildings is a big, big piece of it. And I will give a shout out to New York City that just did a really amazing and ambitious policy on mandating building retrofits and forcing buildings to improve their energy performance. We started that a long time ago, maybe 10 years ago, just with benchmarking and having information. When you can see, and I saw a LEED plaque on my way here. Like, we have LEED, and we're starting to get into benchmarking of buildings, but benchmarking in buildings, I don't know if you guys have the little grades for restaurants. Like, if there's not an A in the window of your restaurant, do you really want to eat there? When we start to become literate around energy use in buildings, and when we say, oh, do I want to buy in this house? Do I want to live in this house? Do I want to rent this office space? And the energy performance of that space is just something that you would know, just like you want to know what the rent is, just like you want to know what the quality of the materials are. That just becomes normal. Then it will become less necessary to mandate these things because everyone will just know, and you need to line things up. This is the job of policy, of like, here are the best opportunities for improving energy performance, and here's how much they cost, and here's how we can finance them for you, or here are the state grant programs and all of that. That has to become very easy. So we're getting there, I think, on buildings. And on transportation, we're not quite as far along as we are on the power sector in terms of knowing what the solutions are and knowing what the policies are to drive them, but we're getting there. And then I don't have good pictures for these other ones, but the other two sectors that are front of mind for us, or that we need to address because they are also sectors of emissions, are the industrial sector, which is kind of, I've been doing this for a long time, and we're going to get to the industrial sector next year. Because that is really challenging. We know how to do things like improve energy efficiency of industrial motors, but to figure out how to do like smelting of metals and cement manufacture and eliminate those process emissions without eliminating those industries from our state, or replacing them with the next generation version of those industries, is something that we just don't have all of the thinking and analysis that we need to even know what are the solutions and policies. So that's why one of the cornerstones of the way that we're approaching the Green New Deal is to have flexibility, because we have to learn how to design policy with uncertainty in mind. There are lots of things that we do know, but we don't know the pace of technological innovation. We don't know how quickly prices will come down. We don't know what's going to happen globally, and there are many things that we're dealing with that are global commodities. So we might be doing something, but some other places are doing the opposite thing, and we have to be able to say we're going to achieve our goal in the smartest, most cost-effective way with the most collateral benefits for everybody, even though we don't know all those things. So that's a challenge for us, and in the industrial sector, it's more challenging because we just know less. The other sector, which is also very challenging in a different way, is the ag and forestry sector, because we have discrete emissions like, landfills or, animal waste systems. We have to manage animal waste, and I'm not talking about individual cows. We may have to manage individual cows too, but just man-made because of the way that we run our ag and forestry systems that are sources of emissions that we can tackle directly. So that looks more like a power plant, even though it's different. But then they're just kind of like, what are the best practices for carbon sequestration in soils, for forest management, not just for carbon, but for everything that we care about, biodiversity and ecosystem management and wildlife and just quality of life. Like, we want to have all of those things. So what can the state policies do that are still trying to get us to a carbon neutral economy, and maybe increasing sinks is part of that, but you're never going to put a cap on the ag and forestry sector the way you could in the power sector. So again, we have some more learning to do in terms of what are the best package of policies that are going to get you that best combination of results. So those are kind of the sector by sector by sector. And then running through each sector are a few things. And you could think just transition rubric, which means different things to different people, but I'll tell you how we've been thinking about it. One is communities. There are communities now that rely on the incumbent industries. So if we're a town and we have a big nuclear plant, and that nuclear plant's been paying the tax base for our school system, for 40 years, and now that plant's going to shut down, like, what is my town going to do? It's one thing if you're in the middle of a city and there's lots of other things going on, but there are places where coal plants and nuclear plants and other large industrial facilities are the lifeblood of that community, and you can't just pull the rug out. So you can't say, oh, we're going to that's actually unhealthy for us indefinitely, but you can say we want to help figure out what is the glide path that will help that community over time transition to other forms of economic development that community can continue to thrive. And that's coming from the community. I mean, it's not like the state is going to come in and say, now you'll be making, growing spinach in an indoor garden or something like that. That is one idea. So that just the idea of a glide path, and again, we can use policy for this, and some of the policies do create revenue flows, and we have used RGGI money for this kind of thing to help, replace that tax base, and less and less and less each year until there's another resource that can help be the economic life of that area. And another is, of course, the employees. Everybody can't just go be installing solar panels or, become part of the offshore wind industry, even though there is quite a large variety of jobs, because it's not just the installers and the manufacturers, and there's the architects and the engineers, and then there's the lawyers, and I mean, there's so many jobs associated with, when you think about like physically what's happening in the energy sector, but they're not located in the same place. It's not necessarily the same skill set. Sometimes you have enough time, like with the nuclear plant, where you would say, well, we have a lot at a plant that's closing and put them elsewhere in the company at the other plant, or they work on decommissioning of that plant. But some people, they're going to have to be retraining them to go to another sector. I mean, and it might not be geographically where they're living now. So that's very disruptive. So what can the state policies be that are encouraging companies and just supporting workers directly to help smooth that transition? So even though these are disruptive economies, industries, we have a lot of time. We don't have a lot of time to solve climate. I believe it's 12 years, but we have time to orchestrate an orderly transition, and certainly employees a big part of that. And then I would say communities, again, there's a different world of communities that are more the communities that have been historically overburdened and underserved. And environmental justice is part of this, but every one of those communities is not necessarily you would categorize as an environmental justice community, but it's the idea of on the benefits side. We have to make sure that the benefits are accruing to all, and actually accruing disproportionately to the communities that have suffered the most. So again, not just only thinking about carbon and what is the least cost way to reduce carbon in the quickest way, but how do we make sure that in communities that have a lot of air pollution and asthma rates and all of that, that we are committed to cleaning up the air in that place first, even if it's not related to carbon, even if you're doing, when you go, when multifamily housing, there's so many more challenges to just dealing with, like, for example, upgrading buildings that are rent controlled can trigger an increase in the rent. So that's not good if you want to maintain affordable housing, but you don't want to force people to live in crappy housing because you can't improve it, because then it will up the rent. So we've got to figure out how to deal with those kinds of challenges and make sure that more energy efficiency is going to low-income houses. They're the ones that are having the hardest time paying their energy bill. And that you're not just going in there with efficiency, but you're thinking about mold and air quality and renewables and resilience and, what happens when there's a storm, and, you want to be able to have centers in communities where people can have electricity for whether it's just charging their phones or soon charging their vehicles, making sure that we are thinking ahead and delivering those benefits to the communities that need it most. So that's a world of just transition. Other things that I think of in this space that kind of run through everything are resilience, which is really its own thing, but it's part of this, that when we're building our new economy, we're thinking about, we know that those 100-year storms are coming every other year now, and I live right on the water. I'm acutely aware of how frequently my basement floods and how quickly I have to get my boiler on the roof or whatever it is. We should not be building one more thing that is not resilient. And that, when you think about keeping our roads and bridges in good working order, and we need to keep doing that with resilience in mind, we should never be rebuilding something that's not designed to those new specifications. And the last piece, which I'm not going to talk about at length, but I'm happy to in the Q&A, is financing. Utilities are great sources of financing, but there's a world of investment happening here. And New York has something called the Green, which is the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. No other state has one, not even California. So that is a financing mechanism to help get efficiency and renewables off the ground and bridge the gap. Banks are willing to finance right now, and what we need to finance, and much of that has to do with just unfamiliarity with what we're investing in. Like if we, this seems like a very efficient building already because it's new, and it has that lead. But if you're going to renovate a building and you know that you're going to have energy savings, it could be 30, 40%. That's a revenue stream of your lower energy bill that you're going to have for the life of that building. You should be able to take that to the bank. But that bank might be like, what the hell are you talking about? Energy efficiency? Like, how could it be that big? I don't even know what you're talking about. I'm not familiar with these technologies. Nobody's doing this. Nobody's come here before asking for that. So it's almost like providing an assurance, a credit guarantee that will allow other funders to come and finance big development projects because they are sort of standing behind the energy savings piece. It's that kind of thing. So figuring out how to make sure when we figure out how we're going to do it, we can also pay for it in the smartest way and leverage whatever dollars public and private sector can bring to the table with financing is how we're going to be able to do things at scale. So those are sort of the pieces of the puzzle. And then the last thing I'm going to mention is the Climate Alliance, and this is really, to me, the most important way that New York is so superior to California, is, California is often thought of as a leader, and they are, but they often do things in a way that only they can do. With legislation and things that other states often aren't able to do, although we are now. But New York has always acted in concert with other states. And I mentioned RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. Now we're very involved with the Transportation Climate Initiative, which is sort of a similar effort among many states to work on transportation. The Climate Alliance are the states that have stood up and said, we are going to meet or beat the Paris the commitments of the Paris Agreement, with or without the federal government. And that, to me, is how we're really going to transform our national economy and ultimately national politics on these issues, because states, I mean, there's politicization everywhere, but it's a little bit less politicized at the state level, even more so at the local level, and there's more of an urgency to like get things done and show what the solutions can look like. And a lot of these states have been working together for many, many years. So the more that New York can not just do everything that I was talking about, but bring all of that experience and information and analysis and policy chops, and its technical analysis, its economic analysis, it's even things like messaging and framing these things in a way that you can figure out how other states who have different politics, different demographics, different building stock, different weather, can do as ambitious policies that we can do, but maybe not everything. So I think almost everything that I've been talking about is modular. And so maybe, you know, in Pennsylvania, they could do the transportation piece, but they can't do the solar piece, or, you know, lots of people are not going to be doing offshore wind because it's not accessible. But you can mix and match and still get to the same end result. And the more that we can be supporting that, and that these clean energy and solutions-oriented industries become the big employers in the state, and they already are. I mean, the clean energy sector is a much greater employer in New York State already, and we haven't even started. But, you know, the companies are all dispersed, and the employees are all dispersed, and they're not a unified force as, the American Petroleum Institute is. So the political power doesn't necessarily follow from investment in solutions and actually realizing all these things, but it can and it will over time. And the more that there are constituents who are realizing all the benefits that I'm talking about, whether it's the businesses who are delivering them, the people who work there, or all of us who are just enjoying having all of these better things in our life, you know, it's like healthcare. When you get it, you really don't want to give it back because it's pretty good. So when we have all of these things, we'll fight to keep them. And then the congressional delegations that represent us will also fight to keep them. And that is what I think in the long term is going to make it possible for our country to embrace these kinds of policy solutions and, you know, real life technical solutions that we need, or we're never going to, I mean, we're not going to be here for very long. So we really do need to do this, and this is the kind of thing that gives me hope every day. And, you know, it's easy to throw rocks at the federal government. It's very, very easy. But, you know, with or without a federal government that cares on about any of these things and wants to do any of these things, we need state and local and community action. I mean, when we had the Clean Power Plan under the Obama administration, that was going to be entirely implemented by the states. And most of the states were not ready for that challenge. So let's not make that mistake again. And we are committed in New York to help make sure that every state is committed to be part of this solution, and also to work with the local communities, the cities, the universities. I mean, it is beyond a village that we're going to have to put our shoulder to the wheel to achieve something that's this transformative. I mean, I kind of joke that my job is to transform the global economy, but I really do feel like that is my job, and it's your job. And I know that one of the things that you guys have been thinking about are the little things, and what can everybody be doing in their own life to just, you know, be moving in this direction, be part of the solution. And there are the things that everybody knows, like we were talking about, you know, having your reusable coffee cup and not using plastic, and, you know, walking and biking more, all of which can be enjoyable in your life as well. And of course, there's voting for people who care about these things and are committed to doing them. But there's also like everything that we are such consumers, we can be telling everybody that we buy anything from that we want these things and we want to have more and better choices and they should be delivering them to us. So our role as consumers shouldn't just be like, well, I went to the gas station and only had gas. You know, there are many businesses now who want to be providing you with these things or who are maybe thinking about it and they need to hear from their customers that that is what we want. And just think about like something about like organic food used to be such a tiny little niche in the supermarket, like you could hardly even see it. And now it's huge because not just did people want it and buy it, but then they told their friends why. And just think about, you know, all of the social media and how people make choices based on what they see all of their friends are doing, and it just becomes normal instead of kind of a lunatic fringe thing. The more that all of these things that we're talking about just become the normal way that anybody would want to be living and consuming in the world is how we could do it and make it easy and help your friends and your family, not just at Thanksgiving dinner, which can be fraught. You know, think about these things from someone who they can actually listen to, because politicians in state and federal capitals aren't always the people who everyone wants to listen to, but you are all the people that all of your friends and family listen to. So everybody can think about things that they are jazzed about and think are really cool in the future and really help make it happen, not just because, you know, you bought that, you used that cup or didn't buy that plastic thing, but because you helped make it become the normal thing and like part of the zeitgeist of where we want to be going as a society. So I'm going to leave you with that thought, and I would love to stick around and answer questions or speak informally with people after. And thanks again so much for having me. It's just a thrill to be here. Do you want to facilitate the questions? Or ask one? Don't be shy. No, you don't.
Oh, yeah, does anyone have any questions?
Yes. Oh, you've got a mic and everything. Yeah, excellent. Yeah, oh, right, I forgot about that. Oh, no, I'm really in trouble now. I was kidding.
So thank you very much. So how do we, with these targets that are like looking long-term out, how do we make sure that we stay on this course when the political life cycle is in much shorter increments, like we've seen what happened at the federal level? So how do we help ensure that we stick to this moving forward?
Yes, that is a great question. And I think there's two different answers. One is make it a law, you know, and we are in the process of doing that, and I don't think I even mentioned that, but I'm very hopeful that we will have comprehensive climate legislation in this state this year. So then it will be the law, and you'll have to overturn a law in order to roll it back. As we've seen, people can do that, so that's not foolproof. To me, the real answer is when you are sending a signal to the marketplace, and I'll use light bulbs and the efficiency standards, because that's my favorite topic, as you know. When we change the energy efficiency standards in this country for light bulbs, and you cannot have the old version of incandescent bulbs anymore, companies, they retooled their manufacturing facilities. And not only that, some of them moved their manufacturing facilities from China to the United States because now they needed to be in a US market making these higher efficiency lighting equipment, light bulbs. And when they tried to roll back the efficiency standards, it almost didn't matter because the industry had made a turn, and now we're making these new things. And now, you know, everyone didn't like the original one, but now we have so many different choices of lighting, and people just want it. So nobody is going back. Nobody is like, where is that rotary phone? I loved my rotary phone. I do have a BlackBerry again, but That's just an aside. So I think both, the more that you're enshrining it in law and making it actually difficult to roll back, but the more that it just becomes, to me, if a policy is going to be durable, people have to buy into it. You can't jam it down their throats. So that's why the process of negotiating with all of the stakeholders, and it's not going to be everybody, we don't really operate by consensus, and sometimes for a reason, but if people buy in and then they start investing accordingly and people become used to and now understand and appreciate and really cherish what they have in the new world with all of this stuff coming, then you can't roll it back. So that's, to me, the real answer for how do you make these policies durable. But it's hard.
Thank you again for coming. I'm going to be a little selfish because I'm in charge of our enrollment management, so undergraduate admissions.
Yeah.
And one of the narratives in looking at your map, that kind of parallels our enrollment. So demographically, where we're pulling students, minus, of course, Pennsylvania. But I would be remiss to not mention that some of the challenges we have is regarding outcomes. So for example, environmental jobs, many of our feeder programs, the socioeconomic, say, outlook for our graduates isn't as high as some believe it should be in terms of our values proposition. So my question to you is, what would be your suggestion? Because I know you talked about that cycle. And one of the things that I think encourages me is I get up on stage and I talk about we are educating the generation that will have jobs that as of today don't exist, but still parents want to hear that their child will be successful and frankly not moving into their basement.
It may be beyond my capabilities to answer this question, as we were joking about that earlier, where our children will live before and after college. Yeah, I mean, I do think just there are real examples now of these jobs. I mean, one thing that I always harp on is that we are not building a clean energy economy of the future. It is here. We already have these jobs, but we just don't know about them because they're not on the front page of the newspaper. I mean, how many people even really know what energy efficiency is and what it takes to, like, who works in that field? It's hard to even find, and they've done, actually, this could be a resource for you. There is, it used to be done by the federal government, and now it's being done privately, but it's an assessment of all the clean energy jobs by state, and they break it down in all different categories, and you can really see, and the way they do this is fascinating. Like, they call people and find out, like, they'll call a utility and say, who are all the companies that you hire to deliver on your energy efficiency programs or your solar program? And then they start calling those companies and they find out how many people that you employ are working in that field, because they're buried. It's not like, oh, I'm just one, it's not ExxonMobil. It's hundreds of little companies, and then finding, I don't know how much information is in that, but I bet it's right underneath it and not that hard to find. Like, what are the actual skill sets and jobs? It doesn't have information like salary information and stuff, but once you have those pieces, I think you would be surprised how much, certainly the volume, and how many different kinds of things we already have. And I love that resource. I don't have it with me right now, but I carry it around all the time because the numbers are so surprising to people, and the variety of areas that people are working. So it is already here. It's not just a future thing, even though, I mean, honestly, even with offshore wind, those companies are here. They've already hired a lot of people. They have, a footprint in New York and a handful of other states. But I mean, I think the other thing that you were getting at also is just valuing this work, which is just like teaching, right? What is wrong with us as a society that we don't pay? I mean, I got a friendly audience here, I think. I suddenly see a lot of nodding. For the most important thing that we do as a society, which is help ourselves learn how to learn. Like, how do we become educated people and lifelong learners? Then you're set, and yet it's like, here's 15 cents. So, yeah, that's the part. When we figure that one out, we will both get a big raise.
I'm going to ask a slightly techie question. So a big solar play in a state that's solar challenged for much of the year. How does that work if we don't get states that aren't solar challenged to be part of that play? I mean, how do we balance out these power needs? It's not windy this week. It is this week. Talk a little bit how you build the grid that can do that.
Yeah. So, I mean, one thing is there's a lot of places that have a good solar resource that's worth tapping into that you might not, you don't think about as like Arizona-like. So one thing is just getting that information. But the real answer, I think, to your question is transmission. So we have to be able to connect the very windy and sunny places to the population centers. And they're not big transmission lines going through their communities, just like you don't want, you know, the coal plant there or the barge of coal. You know, this is even an issue with offshore wind. Like, we want energy, therefore we have to make investments, and they have, you know, pros and cons to them. But I do think transmission is one of the less onerous of the components of the industrial energy sector that we need, and the benefits of having that transmission and bringing all of that wind from the plains to Chicago, or, you know, whatever it is, that is, and it's so much more cost effective than putting resources in places where you don't really have the natural resource that you need there to get the most out of it. So that's definitely a big piece of it. There still are a lot of windy and sunny places, and there are other things, you know, there are a lot of components to the system, so it's not only those things. And you do have new, I mean, offshore wind, it wasn't that long ago when people thought offshore wind was a pipe dream because it was so expensive. And I can't tell you anything about the announcement that is almost coming in 2 seconds, but I will tell you, because it already happened in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, they got prices that were projected to be the price in 2035. So, and so did we. So we, you know, there is a pace of technological change, and one thing that I love that Shell Oil does in their projections of, you know, the different components of the energy sector globally, they always have one sliver that's called surprise. Because we just don't know, and we are, you know, we like to make better mousetraps. We will develop that. So there's transmission, there's maybe more variety than you think. And I think the third thing, which is really the balancing piece, and this also goes to what I was talking about in terms of electrifying vehicles and buildings. They, you know, if you think about what happens in the day, like we all wake up, we turn city lights, you know, computers, whatever, we come home, you know, we go to bed. There's like a curve. But that's not what the energy system, and we built an energy system to serve that. So nuclear plants running all the time, then you'd have like your coal plants, then you'd have your gas plants that could go on. And then it was like wind and sun, they're so variable, like we can't fit them into our little curve. But now we know we don't need to have a curve like that anymore. And who wants to have a curve like that anymore? Because a huge percentage of our cost is that those peak days. They could be 5 days a year when it's 100 degrees and we're paying 10 times, and then that gets socialized across the year. If we could get rid of that, but now we can because we have the Internet of Things. So it's like, hey, why would you run your dishwasher when it's the most expensive time of the day? Just like program it. And just think about Nest thermostats and your phone, and you could put your heat on right before you get home. You don't have to keep it on all weekend while you're away. We have so much technology that can help us, what we call flatten the curve. We do not want a shape like this in the way that we use energy. And then when you think like, okay, I'm flattening the curve, but now I have these intermittent things. So now there's sort of like a valley filling thing. Let's charge all the cars during this time. You know, so if we can give you the incentive that you just plug your car in when you go to work or when you go home, and then the car will know, charge when I get the price signal that I'm in the valley. And same thing with your house. And I mean, there's so much opportunity to balance that now we no longer live in an energy world where baseload power is the value. Now the value is flexibility. I need power that I can use when I need it or save. That's why, I don't think I mentioned storage is a huge, so we're gonna have 3,000 megawatts of storage to start. That's when we can start having batteries, which now we use, literally, it's like a jet engine. It's little tiny gas power plants that are essentially jet engines. We only use them a few times. And we might still need them for something, but when you start thinking about solar plus batteries and how you can use that in a much smarter system, now you're talking about a transformative approach to powering our world that can be, you can take that entire transportation sector and the entire building sector and plug them in to the energy sector, and you don't even need an additional power plant. You just need to use the power you have in a smarter way. Not that we're never going to have any new power plants, but you take my point. I mean, the ability to use that power much more efficiently and effectively is really largely a technology solution that we already have in hand, and we didn't even get the surprise yet. Hi. Yeah.
Hi, Dale. Chris Carrick from the Central New York Regional Planning Board. Thank you for that answer.
Planning.
That was terrific. I read maybe a dozen studies recently on this issue of how much variable renewables we can put onto the grid for a talk that I did. And, you know, Amory Lovins from Rocky Mountain Institute has talked at length about this. In addition to all the great things you talked about, electrifying buildings actually shifts peak demand to the winter when you're using a lot of heat pumps, and that can be a benefit to the grid. Utilizing the power plants that we have more efficiently.
Yeah, exactly.
So that would be another thing. And then there's also exporting power or importing power from neighboring states. So NREL's done a big study on the whole Eastern grid system, looking at variable renewable sources at a 30% penetration level, which is much higher than we have now. So I think the research shows we can get to 40 or even 60% pretty easily before you need to add massive amounts of storage. So that's, I think, an important message to keep getting out there. My question actually is about how we're going to pay for all of this. So I'm a big proponent of the CCPA and really its companion bill, the CCIA, which has a $35 a ton carbon fee. That would generate about $7 billion a year, which is probably what we need to be spending as a state. Now you compare that to what we are spending through the Clean Energy Fund, it's about $500 million a year. Or compare that to what we're spending to subsidize Exelon's nuclear power facilities. So the question, I guess, is why is the governor not supporting the CCPA? Why this alternative proposal? And what does the administration think about the level of revenue that we really need to make this transition in the 12-year time frame that you said we really need to be doing?
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to separate two things. One is just so I said I'm very hopeful and optimistic that we will have comprehensive climate. The budget process, which we just finished, the governor's office, put forward a proposed climate legislation, and there already has been for many years the Climate Community Protection Act that was mentioned. That's another approach, and they're honestly, I think, very similar. The goals are the same: economy-wide decarbonization across all of those sectors, addressing equity. Where there are differences, the governor, and I think we can bridge these, and I think that the CCPA will actually be the foundational text, if you will. But the concerns that I have, and that the governor shares are, what I was talking about, flexibility. Like, we need to have flexibility. So having something, we use the frame of carbon neutrality versus zero emissions, because if you want to have sustainable biofuels be part of the answer, whether it's in transportation or in the power sector, it's not zero emissions. Maybe we're going to still have some carbon capture and storage in some fossil fuel something, whether that's industrial, or buildings. Like, we don't know how we're going to get those last chunks. I mean, we're comfortable saying 100% clean energy. I don't know how long it's going to take us to get off of the nuclear plants, and I know there's a lot of concerns about the nuclear plants, and I share them. But again, my it's like orderly transition. Let's get off of those in an orderly way. Are we going to need Hydro-Quebec or not? Is that renewable or not? So just having the flexibility to not be zero emission, but be net zero. It doesn't mean let's plant trees in Indonesia and that's how we're going to solve our problems. Nobody is talking about that. Nobody is even talking about plant trees upstate and let everyone still suffer with air pollution in the city. So carbon neutrality, I think, if we just roll up sleeves and think about it a little bit more, we can find a way forward. There were some things around, well, date certain and targets and timetables. We absolutely have to have performance metrics. We can't be like, see you in 2040. And it just goes to what you had said earlier, right? We need to show progress towards goal, but let's do it in a smart way, recognizing that things don't happen in a linear fashion, and it's not always a numerical target. You know, there might be something, you know, like we actually have this mostly in New York, but like if you don't change the way utilities are regulated so that they are aligned with you and the only way they make money is selling more, we got to get rid of that. So transforming the utility business model is not a numerical metric of an emissions reduction, but it is a huge performance metric. So things like that. So again, if we could just sit down and talk about these things, we will be able to figure it out. Equity. The CCPA says 40% of funds that are raised in a market-based mechanism like RGGI or carbon tax, or that are collected through the utility bill for efficiency and renewables. But the way that that's drafted is very broad. So 40% of the resources going into disadvantaged communities doesn't necessarily mean, first of all, if we don't use market-based mechanisms, it could be zero. So 40% of zero is zero. Or it's not necessarily that's polluting on your family. It's like, let's get rid of that terrible thing. So again, the goals are the same. It's the rigidity of the mechanics. That's really the crux of it. And the other thing I would say is having analysis that gives us comfort that we can do it. We are not committing to something that we are not going to do. So, you know, can we get there? Because there's a long time and we don't, you know, we know we'll learn and be able to do it. I think we can move on that more. But that's the driving thinking behind not having numerical targets and dates across the board from here to there right now. Both bills have this idea that we'll spend a year really fleshing out the policies. So, and that's a great place to figure out exactly what those dates and timetables should be. So I think all of those things are doable, which is why I'm optimistic that we're going to be able to do it. And just quickly, the last thing on price, I agree that we need to have a price signal. I just think don't lead with your chin. I mean, why a cap? We want a cap on pollution. We want pollution to go down over time. We do want the market to see we are definitely doing this. Like, make no mistake, invest accordingly. This is where we're going. It's not the price that's going to make you do that, or if we only use price or primarily use price. I don't want energy prices to be so high that I throw my refrigerator in the garbage. I want my utility to come and say, your refrigerator sucks. I'm going to help you get this better refrigerator. I'm going to finance it for you. Everyone at Home Depot just wants you to get the most efficient refrigerator, and they're part of our program. And let's do it in a way that has the least cost, not the most cost. So if you're just a carbon price, doesn't take enough account of all of the market barriers that prevent us from doing things like energy efficiency that already make economic sense, but we're just not doing them because when my hot water heater breaks, no price is going to fix that for me. So like, let's fix that and make sure every truck is full of high efficiency water heaters. So that's the, it's yes price. Framing it in this other way, I think, is both more effective as a policy and as a narrative. And we could talk more, like next time let's do a co-presentation, because I can see you have like tons of information in all of these areas. Sorry, yes, one last.
Hi, so I'm a student in the Sustainable Energy Department, and we do learn a lot about vehicle electrification. And obviously, one of the barriers is price, but how are we going to make sure that the impact of turning over fleets to electric vehicles doesn't outweigh the benefits? Because there is the life cycle and all the impacts that our current cars have.
Yeah, that's great too. And that question also goes to other things like, should I really throw my refrigerator away? Like, what about all the embodied energy in the refrigerator? Like, we were told never to throw anything away and that we should keep it forever. It's still working, but it's so bad. So yes, throw away your refrigerator. But that's like a math problem, right? So let's do the calculation of the embodied energy in vehicles and what is the pace that we want to turn vehicles over, because the benefits of having the new and better vehicle, even a high efficiency vehicle that's still using gasoline versus all of the embedded energy in that. And then also, what are we doing when we throw it? Are we just putting it in the landfill, or are we figuring out, how to do everything so that when we're done with it and we need to replace it with the better thing, we have a smart way. I was just talking with a building contractor person around, like, how can we insulate our buildings that when we want to gut the building, we take the insulation out and we can reuse it. Like, my house is actually filled with recycled blue jeans, and that's the insulation. You could like take it out and put it in your next house or whatever. You can't do that with spray foam. But spray foam's what everyone uses. So how do we get the next better generation of spray foam that we can take it out and use it? And it's the same thing with cars. Like, we have to start making our cars that we can take them apart and put them back together again. But it is going to be phased, and we do need to do the math. I mean, and we have done the math. So you're pointing out an important cost that's associated with the transformation, which is separate from the actual cost of buying the electric car and building the charging infrastructure, which are also costs, but they're investments. We're going to invest a huge amount in our energy sector, in our vehicles and our buildings under any circumstances. So it's not like we need $1 gazillion that we don't have. It's like money we're spending on other stuff now. Let's just spend it on better stuff. But what you're talking about isn't just that. It's also, doing the math carefully so that we feel confident that when we are getting these new and better things, we're not just consuming more, but we're consuming smartly, and that we're confident that there is a net benefit. So that is what underlies the analysis of the policies that I'm talking about, why you need an analysis shop behind every policy. But it's a really important point, so thanks for bringing that to the table. And on that happy note,